I'm happy to speak on the Raoul Wallenberg's and Association's UN submission as well. Just, like.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this press release session today. My name is Pegah Solari, and I will be the host of today's session and the panel moderator. On behalf of the Association of Families of Flight PS752 victims, I'd also like to thank all of you and welcome all of you who are watching our news release through our live channels. In honor of the 176 innocent victims aboard PS752, please join us in holding a 30 seconds of silence, which signifies the gap between the two missiles that were shot at the aircraft. Thank you. Over the first 17 months following the shooting down of PS752, the Association of Families has connected with reliable resources inside of Iran, collected evidence, and collaborated with military, aviation, and legal experts to research and analyze the events leading up to the shooting of PS752. The association has published several news pieces and interim reports during this process, and today, on this 24th day of November 2021, this news conference is being held to publish the results of the last 5 months of preparing the final report. The fact-finding committee of the association is composed of 24 individuals, amongst whom there are 6 military and aviation experts, 5 legal experts, 9 family members acting as researchers, 2 designers, 1 editor, and 1 translator. Before I start to introduce our panelists today, it is important to mention that the Persian translation of the executive summary of the final report will also be released today. The full report in Persian is to be released by or prior to the 2nd anniversary of downing of PS752 on January 8, 2022. On the panel with us today, we have Dr. Hamid Ismailion, the association's speaker, Javad Soleimani, the chair of the association's fact-finding committee, Ashkan Dawoodpour, a key member of the fact-finding committee, Ryan Lax as legal counsel from Taurus, Dr. Farzin Nadimi, defense analyst, associate fellow of Washington Institute for Near East Policy, Dr. Shahruz Jahanbin, aviation safety expert, and Yona Diamond, legal counsel from Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. I'm going to start today's panel by addressing you, Dr. Ismailion. You lost your wife and your daughter aboard PS752. Please tell us about the Association of Families, your path since its establishment, and the circumstances that bring you here today.
Thank you very much. I say hi to everybody. The Association of Families of Flight PS752 victims was incorporated as a Canadian nonprofit organization shortly after the downing of Flight PS752, and we represent the families of 140 victims. Over the past 2 years, we faced many challenges, much of which was due to the actions of the perpetrators of this crime. The needless murder of our loved ones, the systematic destruction of all evidence, persecution of witnesses, harassment of our supporters, and ultimately a concerted effort by the Iranian government to sabotage, mislead, and hinder the process. A process that necessitates transparency, accountability to pave the way to any semblance of justice. Justice for us is not monetary compensation, a shallow apology, or false promises. Justice for us is not to stage show trials that implicate low-ranking patsies, but to bring those in charge before an international impartial tribunal and hold them to account for their actions. We knew from the outset that our fight for justice would be long and arduous. Many of us who were born in Iran and spent much of our lives in that country know all too well the nature of that system. Like many of our fellow Iranians, we experience firsthand what the world only has sporadic glimpses of. Rampant human rights abuses, state-organized assassinations, murders, intimidation, and discrimination. After 4 decades, we bear the responsibility to help put a stop to the senseless murder and mayhem caused by an ideological oligarchy. Many reports and findings were produced over these difficult months. These include reports by the then Special Advisor to the Prime Minister, Mr. Ralph Goodell, a report by the United Nations Special Rapporteur, Dr. Agnes Gallimore, and finally the report published by Canada's forensic team, Mr. Jeff Jaworski's team, which was Canada's reaction to the final report published by the Islamic Republic of Iran. The latter was referred to as shambolic, incomplete, and according to Dr. Gallimore, designed to create a maximum of confusion and minimum of clarity. Ultimately, the families were faced with more questions than answers, with no clear outlook towards their main objective. Canada's forensic report was unable to satisfy much of the questions or the family's hope for a roadmap towards justice. We therefore came together yet again to document our own findings surrounding the crime that took the lives of 176 innocent civilians and an unborn child.
Thank you, Dr. Ismailian. It must have been very taxing endeavor for all of you family members. I'm going to actually base your answer here and start a question for Mr. Soleimani. If you could please let us know, you lost your wife in the downing of PS752 and have been acting as the chief of the fact-finding committee for the association. Would you please take us through your sources of information, research method, and if possible, some of your key findings? I understand that you and one other team member are here to share your key findings. So if you could just touch base on the first few and let us know what you have found.
Thank you, Pegah and Hamed. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Jawad Soleimani. I lost my wife, Naz Nabi, in the downing of Flight PS752, and I'm here as the chair of fact-finding committee of the association. To begin, I'd like to thank all those people who supported the families and the association over the past 2 years, specifically those individuals who helped us to prepare this report. Some of them are here today. Some people put their lives at risk to send us valuable information. We deeply appreciate their dedication and courage. We gathered here to make PS752 an example that no one else in the world dares to shoot down a civilian airline. Regarding our resources and methodology, the association collaborated with individuals with expertise and work experience in the civilian aviation industry, as well as individuals with expertise in air defense units and systems. The legal components of this report are prepared by legal advisors of the association. Interviews were conducted with individuals within Iran's air defense network. Testimonies of family members regarding their last conversation with their loved ones were also used, as well as family members' conversation with Iranian judiciary officials. The association has gained access to audio files of Iran's former Foreign Minister Javad Zarif and a very top Iranian official, as well as Iran's head of the Aircraft Accident Investigation Board, Hassan Rezaifeh.
Mr. Soleimani, if you don't mind me interrupting, would you please elaborate on those files a little bit for us, for our audience?
Yeah, sure. For instance, Javad Zarif, the former foreign minister, states that the intentional downing of PS752 is not unlikely. If it was intentional, they means IRGC wouldn't tell the truth. Javad Zarif added that this may remain a mystery forever because in exposing the truth, the government of Iran may be putting its security at risk. Another very top Iranian official in a meeting said, "We wonder how 5 other flights carried along the same flight path without anything happening to them, and why PS752 was the only one targeted." For the protection of our sources, we cannot mention the name of this very top Iranian official, but we can say that his ranking is definitely not lower than Javad Zarif. Public interviews and speeches of military officials, both prior to and following the downing of Flight PS752, were analyzed in this report. In addition to Iran's final report, we examine and use reports of the Special Advisor of the Canadian Prime Minister, the UN Special Rapporteur, Human Rights Watch, and Canadian Forensic Team in our analysis. Technical books and articles were also utilized in the preparation of this report. And now some of the key findings of the report for today. 1. Aerospace left open deliberately. Following IRGC missile attack on US bases in Iraq and only hours before the downing of Flight PS752, the government of Iran deliberately kept the airspace open and used civilian airliners as human shields. This decision was made by top Iranian officials at Iran's Supreme National Security Council. This finding is based on top Iranian official speeches, interviews, as well as audio files of their meetings and conversations. In addition to that, regarding the aerospace, Iran's final report claims that the country's western skies were gradually evacuated for passenger planes as a preventive measure and in anticipation of a conflict. However, examining the airspace of Western Iran at different times in Flight Radar 24 website on early morning of January 8, 2020, before and after Iran attacked on American bases in Iraq, shows that Iran's skies were not evacuated even in the claimed Western corridors of the country. Number 2, very important key findings. In addition to bulldozing the crash site, looting passenger belongings, interference with physical evidence, many of the passengers' personal devices were never returned. And those that were returned to their families led our investigators to conclude that other than physical damage, as a result of the crash, the devices were subjected to a systematic destruction and removal of their key memory and communication components. There is an appendix, Appendix J, in the report that you can see the inspection report of the professional expert regarding the systematic destruction of electronic devices. Number 3, very painful key findings for families. Mishandling of the forensic procedures. The association has obtained evidence that DNA testing on some victim bodies didn't match their stated identification by Iranian government. This recklessness on the part of the government of Iran has had serious psychological consequences for families, some of whom didn't receive the whole bodies of their loved ones and were given the remains of other victims instead. In fact, the Iranian government deceived the whole world and probably the vast majority of the families regarding the identification of bodies. Number 4, there are serious questions for families and many experts on that night. For instance, the screening for US citizenship. At the designated security checkpoint at Tehran International Airport, controlled by the IRGC, some passengers were asked about having an American passport, which raised lots of questions regarding their intention for asking such a question. The IRGC may have ensured that there were no passengers on board Ukraine International Airlines Flight PS752 with American citizenship.
Thank you, Mr. Soleimani. Very sorry to hear all of that. The next question I'm going to ask from Mr. Ashkan Dawoodpour. Mr. Dawoodpour, you lost your sister-in-law aboard the flight and have been a key member of the fact-finding committee. Would you please take us through the rest of your committee's key findings?
Sure. I will continue with finding number 5. Number 5, questionable 57-minute delay. According to experts familiar with Tehran International Airport baggage handling system, the main reason for PS752 57-minute delay may not have been overweight baggage as claimed in Iran's final report. Instead, it is possible that a passenger or few passengers disembarked the aircraft during the 57-minute delay. Some of the victims in their last contacts with their families indicated seeing some passengers disembarking from the aircraft. Finding number 6, highly experienced Torrent 1 operator. The operator of the Torrent 1 system that shut down PS752 had vast experience and expertise with short-range missile systems, including his service in Syria. This finding is based on interviews and statements made by multiple authorities at Tehran's military court in meetings with the families of the victims. Given the experience of the operator, even if he perceived PS752 as a hostile target, it is unclear why he decided to launch the first missile when PS752 was still outside of his engagement range, unless he relied on his superior commander's radar and was ordered to do so. Otherwise, it is hard to believe that he couldn't see the difference between the alleged cruise missile and PS752 with this level of expertise. Number 7, implausibility of misidentification. It is highly unlikely that the Torrent 1 missile system operator could not distinguish an aircraft from a cruise missile. This finding is based on technical capabilities of Torrent 1 system on detecting hostile targets and its proximity to 2 international airports of Tehran and Mehrabad. A cruise missile and a Boeing 737 have major differences in size and other parameters such as radar cross-section, speed, altitude, and motion profiles, which makes the two appear differently on the Torrent 1 radar display. Number 8, implausibility of misalignment. Iran's final report alleges that there was a 105-degree calibration error in finding true north of the Torrent 1 missile system. That is highly unlikely and appears to be fabricated. This finding is based on technical features of the mobile Torrent 1 system and its missile launch capabilities, as well as analysis of Iran's explanation in its final report and inconsistencies discovered in that report. These inconsistencies include a mismatch between the timing of the sequence of events as introduced by Islamic Republic of Iran and the actual locations of the PS752 at those times. After 7 months, Iran introduced this so-called 105-degree misalignment claim to show in the eyes of the operator, the plane was not moving from southeast to northwest, but rather from southwest to northeast. Our thorough analysis suggests that in fact, the claim 105-degree misalignment was fabricated to convince the world that human error was the cause of the downing. Number 9, rerouting of Atlas Global flight. Flight KK-1185 of Atlas Global Airlines was given a different path to bypass military sites where the missiles were fired from. On January 8, 2020, flight KK 1185 of Atlas Global, which had the same scheduled departure time as PS752, was routed through a different checkpoint than what it was normally using in the past couple of months, likely to bypass military sites where the missiles were launched at PS752 and to avoid possible interception by IRGC missiles. Number 10, Torenvan tactical movement and misidentification. The evidence does not support the plausibility of PS752 being the only flight that was mistaken for a hostile target, despite the fact that there were earlier flights with similar speed, altitude, route, and other specifications as PS752. The Canadian forensic team has rejected Iran's claim about remaining in standby or in inactive mode after the 100-meter movement for more than an hour and under war situation, but then simply concludes that 4 other flights were also tracked by the Torenvan unit and could have had the same fate as PS752. However, analysis of the last 4 flights which departed Tehran International Airport prior to PS752 shows that the operators would have had multiple chances to realize that there is an error in the system and could have fixed the error if there were any. Instead, they decided to only target flight PS752. This issue has not been explained by the Canadian forensic team, and therefore this scenario remains an unproven theory unless proven with facts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dawoodpour. I am actually going to, first of all, let our attendees know there is a section for question and answer. Once the panelists cover their presentation, we will come to you, and I will absolutely try to, I am keeping track of whose hands are raised, so I will come to you. I apologize for any delays there. I'd like to pose the next question to you, Dr. Jahanbeen. You are here as an aviation safety expert. Could you please explain for our audience, who do not know the standard international process of serious incident and accident investigation in aviation, and perhaps explain for us how the Islamic Republic of Iran's investigation has deviated from these standard procedures?
Yes, over the century of aviation, especially in commercial and transport category, accident investigation, especially for passenger airliners, has been highly regulated and well established by all members of United Nations. There are books, manuals, guidelines, training provided for all investigators. It's including Islamic Republic Accident Investigation Board, or AIB. I urge the readers to refer to section 3.2 for the association report. For the second part of the question, how Islamic Republic investigators acted differently from international standards. Again, the first revision of accident investigation for Annex 13 was published back to 50-60. So this is not a new document, it's an old document. And it's very well known by the authorities inside Iran. When they start the investigation by misinformation and follow that by misleading almost everybody, so it was clear they are not planning to abide by the international rules, period. Like my friend, Mr. Jawad Soleimani said, not sharing the notice of airman to UIA flight crew. I'm talking about the NOTAMs for the Iran-Iraq airspace. Moving critical element of investigation and crash site like fuselage, empennage, engine, landing gear, and as well as the warhead for the missile. Keeping flight data recorders, cockpit voice recorders, victims' belongings. So they all suggest that they are hiding something. And the fact that head of Islamic Republic Civil Aviation Organization referred to that incident as maintenance issue, that suggests that they were trying initially to hide evidence of the crime.
Okay, thank you very much. I am going to ask the next question from you, Dr. Farzi Nadimi. As a military expert, based on everything that we've heard so far, what were your thoughts about the events of that night when you first heard about what happened? What do you think about the airspace being left open? Okay, Dr. Nadimi may not be with us right now. I am going to ask one more follow-up question from you, Dr. Jahanbeen, if you don't mind. Could you please take us through what roles the international community, such as Transport Safety Board of Canada or International Civil Aviation Organization, played in the PS752 investigation? And if you could please tell us about the expectations and shortcomings of their investigation, if any. You did cut out when you were giving us your first answer. If you could please maybe, I'm not exactly sure about your microphone, but if you could maybe come closer to it and make sure we can hear you better, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, sure. I'm want to make sure that you hear me clearly now. Oh, perfect. Yes, the tragedy, the event occurred on January 8, 2020. The Annex 13, Chapter 5, the third paragraph says the stakeholder, including Canadian authorities, should initiate investigation within 30 days if the lead investigator does not initiate anything. So it's on the report again, section 2.3. So I urge the readers to look closely on that section. The Civil Aviation Organization of Iran does not have independent and impartial body to investigate serious incident and accident investigations. This is not news to other member states. They have copies of audits by International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, mandating the Islamic Republic to must produce requirements to conduct an investigation. That means have an independent body. Moreover, the Islamic Republic of Iran does not have the technical capability and knowledge to conduct an investigation. So they withhold, or the better term is they hostage to black boxes known as FDR and CVR until I believe mid-June 2020, almost 6 months, which that 6 months is very critical for accident investigation and the authorities' accessibility, to publish the final report within 12 months. So they mishandled that for half of the investigation period. Again, on November 2020, almost last year, ICAO Council urged Iran to complete PS752 accident investigation final report. The final report published on December 28 does not have the essential element of the accident investigation, and that's a major difference from what we saw in the international community, which is unique.
Thank you very much. So Dr. Nadimi, sorry, I called on you a little bit before. Could you, as a military expert, what were your thoughts about the events of that night when you first heard about what happened? What do you think about the airspace being left open?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Good. Well, events of that night actually started when the IRGC fired missiles, surface-to-surface missiles at American air base, military base in Western Iraq. And it started this war-like situation when the U.S. response could not be actually predicted by anybody. The IRGC, according to their senior commanders at the time, expected a resolute American response. They, according to the U.S. president at the time, at least 52 targets were being singled out for retaliation, and it seems that the IRGC had taken those threats of retaliation pretty seriously. So they expected that when they fired missiles at a U.S. military base, and with casualties expected, so the Americans would basically retaliate pretty harshly. And I was at the time live on the TV. Doing live commentary, and at the same time I was monitoring the civilian air traffic using one of those air traffic monitoring websites, and I was horrified by the picture that I was seeing, that civilian air traffic was all over the place. Iranian overflight corridors, Iraqi overflight corridors, and flights taking off and landing on Iranian airports. So the first thing that came to my mind was, oh my God, what's going to happen to these airliners? There is a serious threat because of the surface-to-surface missiles that were fired. Some of those missiles were in the class of Fateh 110. They are not actually full ballistic missiles, and they are called semi-ballistic missiles that do not raise to a very high altitude. So they pose a threat to civilian air traffic that are flying at an altitude of 36,000 feet or so. And with the military confrontation, just predicted and tit for tat coming after that, you could never predict that what could happen to civilian air traffic. And according to their own final report, they should have closed the airspace to civilian traffic. They had all those measures in place to do that. Well, according to the Iranian aviation laws, it is the responsibility of the civil aviation organization to do that with the coordination of the government and the Ministry of Transportation. But at some stage, the National Security Council also came into this decision-making loop. And as we saw in the Iranian final report, there has been in place an elaborate system, which included the air defense system, the integrated air defense system, the Khatam Air Defense Headquarters, and civilian air traffic authorities, to make sure that in times of the military situations, there is at least some kind of coordination to safeguard the safety of those civilian airplanes. Well, the final report mentions that at some point, with top secret military operations in place, there might not be a well coordinated response. However, the military authorities do have the civilian flights, all the information pertaining to civilian air flights, and they had to make sure that their operations did not interfere with any civilian operations. And in this case, the Khomeini International Airport, although it was deemed very unlikely to be attacked by any American military response. However, because it was an civilian airport only, unlike Mehrabad, which is also an airbase, a military airbase. However, the Khomeini International Airport is in proximity to one of the most important Iranian military sites, which is the Bidgane Missile Research and Development Site, just miles away. And it is highly likely that any military action against Iran would also include at least some kind of a missile strike against the Bidgane site. And with that in mind, any airplanes taking off from the Khomeini International Airport would also come under threat.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Ismailioun, before we open our session to questions, would you please share with our audience what's next for you and the association? What are your demands?
Thank you. I first go to the conclusion. The downing of Flight PS752 could not be a horrific combination of some coincidences. The intentional act of keeping the Iranian airspace open, the technical capacity of the Toraman system, and Iran's integrated defense network in detecting hostile targets, the positioning of the Toraman system near Tehran International Airport, the systematic concealment of the root cause of the crash, the destruction of existing evidence at the crash site, and Iran's vague and misleading reports all indicate that the downing of Ukraine International Airline Flight PS752 was deliberate. The onus was on the government of Iran to be transparent and conduct a full, thorough, and fact-based investigation, but they failed to do so. So I want to go to the demands. Unfortunately, there is no mechanism in international law for affected families to actively participate in truth-seeking and justice. ICAO rules go to 70 years ago, but these changes should be made, that where the country shoots down a plane in its own airspace, it must not have the responsibility to do the investigation. The victims' families, they have to have a formal role as observers in any investigation, and all countries of which victims are citizens must have the equal rights of participation in the investigation, like the country of the aircraft registration and the country of the crash. In relation to find the truth, we have two different groups of demands here. One is for finding the truth and one for justice. To find the truth, we need remedy the fundamental deficiency in Iran's final report. We need disclosure of the facts and evidence that underlying current non-public military persecution of the low-level officials in Iran. We need fully release the contents of PS752's black boxes, disclosure of the contents of the Toremon black box, disclosure of communication of the civil military operational coordination with Atlas Global, the flight that Ashkan mentioned, and Aseman flight. We need to analyze the airport CCTV footage to identify the true reason behind the 57-minute delay. And we need to interview the available witnesses and review all available evidence. There are many legal complexities in relation to this case. I go to the legal demands of the associations. The families called for the issuance of arrest warrants for many high-ranking officials of Iran, whose names and positions are listed in this report. Opening a criminal case in Canada and referring the case to domestic courts in Ukraine and Canada can be a good step. So we believe that Canada and the affected countries should trigger the dispute resolution process without further delay. If we have sent the notice of claim to Iran and a reminder to Iran, we don't really understand why we are waiting now. And the second one, we need RCMP to open the criminal case in Canada with respect to acts of terrorism, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The government of Ukraine should continue its criminal investigation with full force and prosecute the perpetrators in Ukraine and we need support from all affected countries. Also, the United Nations Human Rights Council should mandate an international and impartial investigation into the downing of PS752. And there are two other demands that we have asked from Canada several times. One is to enlist IRGC as a terrorist group in the terrorist group list in Canada. And the other one is to impose targeted Magnitsky sanctions on high-ranking officials of Iran. All political and legal tools can be used to find out the truth if there is the necessary political will to pursue it. The families seek to utilize this report to file a complaint independently with the International Criminal Court, while supporting the legal action of the affected countries in bringing the case to ICAO and ultimately the International Court of Justice. In closing, it is necessary to reiterate the association's demand that the innocent protesters who were arrested in Iran, contrary to basic human rights, must be freed forthwith. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ismailion, and everybody else on the panel. We are now open to questions. I've had some hands that I saw were raised. If you still have questions, please raise your hand again so I keep your place in line. The first question, I believe, is from Ashley Burke. Ashley, if you could please start by unmuting yourself, and also please everybody start by letting us know which news channel or which media you are here from. Thank you.
Thanks for taking my question. It's Ashley Burke with CBC National News. I'm hoping to ask Javed this first question. Can you tell us a little more details about how many families the report found received remains that the DNA testing showed were not their loved ones? What's your reaction to this and what does it suggest?
Thank you, Ashley, for the question. Yeah, it was very painful finding for all of us. I think the vast majority of the victims are buried in Iran. About 20 victims actually are moved to outside Iran, and among them, correct me if I'm wrong, Hamed, I think 5 of them did the DNA test to make sure that they received the right body, and for all of them, the result didn't match with what Iran stated for identification. which shows that probably the vast majority of the families of victims didn't receive the whole bodies of their loved one, which had serious psychological consequences for families. And Iranian government deceived Canada and the whole world regarding the identification of bodies. Canada told some families of victims on January 8th, in the beginning after the downing of Flight PS752, that they are doing good in identification of bodies, but as you can see, they deceived Canada and whole the world.
And just to follow up, Javad, the government, the transport minister said that he has heard about the reporting. He met with victims' families, and that the findings, there are some parts that are the same, but they've been interpreted differently, and that they still don't have credible evidence on their end to say that this was intentional, but that they are going to look into the report and see if there's any new information that they can use going forward. What's your reaction to that, and what do you want to see happen next?
Yeah, we had a meeting with transportation minister and foreign affairs ministers 2 days ago. So our report is built on other reports, the Canadian forensic team report, the report of the special advisor of the Prime Minister, and as well as United Nations reports. There are some similar findings, but we use different resources like the audio files of top Iranian officials and some first-hand evidence from local inside Iran and families. And so we have some new key findings, but I think families and governments are on the same page. All of us believe that still there are numerous unanswered questions, and this is because of Iran's misleading behavior. And that's why our main demand is conducting an international impartial investigation. We think governments and families are on the same page. Hope we can conduct a transparent investigation to get the truth and then bringing justice for PS752 case.
Can I add something here, Pega?
Go ahead.
So I want just to clarify, as far as I know, there were 3 victims. We have the report in hand, and for the privacy of the families, we are not going to disclose any more information. And about the fact-finding report of the association, yes, there are some similarities, but there are some big differences too, in my opinion. One is the conclusion of the report. So it's completely different from the forensic report. And for example, for the capacity of Thorium 1, we everywhere we said that it is very unlikely, highly unlikely, that they misidentified the plane, and the misalignment of the story is very unlikely to be to happen that night. So there are some differences, and so I can't say that they're not absolutely the same.
Just one thing I want to mention, that I think even Canadian government, Ukrainian government, all affected governments and families, all of us believe that there are numerous unanswered questions. Even the Canadian forensic team report. And that's why we are demanding international investigation to discover the truth.
And actually, I wanted to add to Mohammed and Javad, there are also inconsistencies within the report in the way that they have explained the sequence of events that doesn't add up. And we have explained that in our report. So this is one of the reasons that our conclusion is different, because these inconsistencies were not captured in Canadian forensic team report.
Okay, thank you, panel. I am now going to go to Brianna Karsten. If you could please let us know which news channel you're here from.
Hi, good afternoon. It's Brianna Karsten-Smith with Global News in Edmonton. First, I just wanted to get Ahmad to clarify. Did you say so it was 3 victims' families did DNA test, not 5?
Yes, correct.
Okay, 3. Okay. And then I just wanted to know an overall reaction. How has your relationship been with the federal government? I know you've been through, I believe, 3 ministers now since this happened in less than 2 years. So how have those conversations go? Do you feel like you're making progress?
Thank you for your question, Brianna. You know, we have had ups and downs. At the beginning, everything was good. We got very good support, but everything slowed down, and everybody blamed the pandemic of coronavirus. But I suggest the pandemic of politics, because everybody is talking about politics, diplomacy, negotiation with Iran. And in my opinion, the reaction to Iran hasn't been firm and resolute enough. We have had tools in hand that we didn't use. We didn't open the criminal case for the second worst terrorist attack against Canadians. After Air India, this is the second one, but RCMP refused to open a criminal case. Now, us as a Canadian citizens, we have to go to Ukraine and ask Ukraine to have a domestic court or refer this case to International Criminal Court. This is one of the biggest problems that we have had. The other one, as Javad said, I remember on 16th of January 2020, Minister Champagne promised us an impartial international investigation. But look at us now. After 2 years, this falls on our shoulders to do something that the government and the international community refused to do. That was ICAO's responsibility to publish a report. That was the government of Ukraine, Canada, UK, and Sweden to publish this kind of report. But we felt this responsibility falls on our shoulders to do this, to publish this report. And if you review through the report, there's nothing that is not based on facts. There's no conspiracy theory here. All of them is based on facts, but Iran hasn't paid for what they have done on that day. And look at the show trial in Iran. 3 days ago, the family members, the mourning families in Iran, they were surrounded by all the military agents and plainclothes agents in Iran and in Tehran to their voice not be heard. So what we are doing now, where is the criminal case here in Canada? Where is the criminal case in Ukraine? Why we don't join the criminal case in Ukraine? These are all questions that we have, and 2 years has passed. From the beginning, we have heard you have to be patient. Okay, we have been patient, but now we have run out of patience and we need answers. If there's a statement going out in 2 days, I've heard that this is coming out, we don't want to see another kind and soft language reaction to what Iran has done. We need to see a resolute and firm reaction to Iran's crimes. Thank you.
Pegah, may I add something?
First, actually, I have Yona's hand was up. I wonder if he wants to go first. Yona Diamond, please.
Java, you can go ahead.
Go ahead, Yona, go ahead.
I just wanted to add really briefly back to Ashley's question about the Canadian Forensic Report. So one of the key findings of the Canadian Forensic Report was that they found no information that contradicts the suggestion that IRGC, a single operator, shot down PS752 without receiving the approval from his command. And the forensic team also found no evidence that Iranian officials ordered the shoot down. So the problem with this is it's not exactly a finding, because you can't say conclusively that those scenarios had not happened. And this report brings evidence that suggests those scenarios are possible and plausible. Thank you. And hence the need for an international investigative mechanism. So, we should be very careful as to take that as a conclusion to close this file, because it simply cannot be. There's no evidence. I mean, there is now evidence suggesting the opposite, that it's possible that the operator wasn't working alone and fired on higher orders.
Thank you. Java, do you still have something else you want to add, or should we go to a...
Yes, please. Okay, from the very beginning, we demanded for joint investigation, having a joint investigation team like what was for MH17 case, but unfortunately governments didn't approve with that. And the RCMP was supposed to cooperate with Ukrainian investigation team, but I'm here as the chair of fact-finding committee. We had lots of meetings with RCMP. RCMP is very slow and inefficient. And this is not at all acceptable. This is not at all acceptable. And we cannot wait forever for Iran. We demand impartial international investigation. It doesn't matter that the Canadian forensic team report conclusion is a little bit different from our conclusion. What matters, and we are on the same page on it, there are still numerous unanswered questions. We need to get the truth, to get the closure. I cannot describe just by words what we've been through over the past 2 years, and this is not at all acceptable from the Canadian government and RCMP to be so slow.
Thank you, Mr. Soleimani. If there is a follow-up question, I will come back to you, Brianna. I apologize. I'm going to allow our next speaker to start. Alison Lampert, it's your turn. If you could please let us know which media you are here from. You need to unmute yourself.
Thanks. Can you hear me, please? Can you hear me? Great. Alison Lampert with Reuters. So first, just to clarify with the Canadian Forensic Team report, so would you say you would disagree based on your report with what the Canadian Forensic Team found?
Go ahead, Hamid.
Okay, so yeah, the conclusion is completely different. We think that the downing of Flight PS752 was a deliberate act. So it's very hard for us to read the mind of the criminals, but based on the facts, these things that they were mentioned in Iran's final report and Canada's forensic report is just following the story of misalignment. And we think that this misalignment couldn't have happened. So this is the biggest difference between these two reports. We agree with some parts of it. We agreed with the path to take Iran to International Court of Justice. But if Canada's government thought that with this report they gave us some closure, I think they were wrong. We don't have the answers, and we still need, as Jawad said, the right investigation to know the answers.
Thank you. And just, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So just one thing to add, the Canadian government conclusion, maybe we cannot call it conclusion, as Jonas said earlier, saying that they didn't find any evidence to show that it was intentional or pre-planned. We acknowledge that having a solid evidence to show that it was intentional is hard, but at the same time, we do believe that there are lots of circumstantial evidence suggesting that it was intentional. And we are not done with investigation and truth. I think even the Canadian government believe that there are still numerous unanswered questions because of Iran's misleading behaviors and reports. So I think all of us should focus on having impartial international investigation. The Canadian Forensic Team report had some really good findings, but incomplete, as they acknowledged too about it.
And if I can just follow up with one other question. So I've heard cases of families of air crash victims sort of commissioning or hiring experts to prepare reports. I've never heard, and some of the air crash investigators that I've spoken to have never heard of a case of families actually doing their own report, so to speak. Is this the first time you ever heard of a group doing this? And sort of what was your thinking in coming up with this method for doing this report?
I think, yeah, if you go back to the history, MH17, IR-655, 1988, the Korean airplane that Soviet Union downed, and there are lots of incidents and tragedies in the past, and some of them crimes, bombing. For Lockerbie bombing, for example, if you go back in 1988, the US government and the British government, they did the investigation. For MH17, Ukraine delegated the case to Netherlands to do the investigation. both the safety investigation and the criminal investigation was done with 5 countries with different jurisdiction system. But here we have 4 countries, and Ukraine is the only one who opened the criminal case. Iran didn't hand over the criminal case to any other country. Islamic Republic of Iran didn't hand over the safety investigation to anybody else. And that's why we are here. So all the countries, they waited and they sat at the side to see what Iran is doing. This is not right. I know there are gaps in the international law, but when the country, this is the first time in the history, Alison, that the country shoots down his own plane in his own soil. This is the first time in the last 76 years of aviation history. And the international community inaction and silence is complacency with the criminals, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. I am now going to go to Andrew Duffy.
Hi, I'm a reporter with the Ottawa Citizen. I'm just wondering, first off, can you tell me, are the audio files that you describe, are those going to be released publicly?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, some parts of it. Yeah, but one of the audio files, we cannot release it because of the security issues and for protection of our sources in Iran.
Okay, and secondly, you believe that the commercial airlines were being used as a human shield. So can you help us understand your theory of the case? If that is in fact what happened, why then would Iran shoot down PS752?
Oh, I can talk about it. Okay, first of all, based on IRGC commanders' speeches and interviews, all of them were fully aware of the risk for civilian airliners, and also based on our audio files of meetings and some credible reports we received from their meetings, all of them were fully aware of this, but they kept their airspace open and put civilian airliners at risk. This is one element of this crime. The second element is about shooting down of Flight PS752. There are circumstantial evidence showing that it couldn't be just a human error. And you are asking me what was the reason for downing of Flight PS752? My answer is that we cannot read the minds of criminals, and this is not our responsibility to do that. And it was, the onus was on Iran to prove that it was intentional. But there are some scenarios, some hypotheses that talking about the motivation of the Iranian government for downing of PS752 intentionally. I can say about asymmetric war strategy based on Hossein Salami, the chief commander of IRGC, on January 12 in his speech in Iranian parliament. What he was describing about on that night had all elements of asymmetric war. And the thing is that you cannot see the Iranian government as a reasonable government or logical government. They can do anything stupid. And they are supposed to answer these questions. This is not our responsibility to say, okay, why did you shoot down the Flight PS752 intentionally? And it's very easy for the Iranian government. I'm telling this directly to Ali Khamenei, the leader of the regime, because all other Iranian officials are just like puppets. It is very easy for Iranian government to prove that it wasn't intentional. We have some technical demands regarding the Thorium-1 black box, regarding the black box of Flight PS752, regarding the communication between the air traffic controls and some other flights. If it wasn't intentional, if it was just human error, it's very easy. Show us the evidence. That's it.
Thank you. We are kind of running out of time. We're getting closer to the end of our session, and I do still have one raised hand. Dr. Nadimi, would you like to elaborate on Mr. Soleimani's answer?
I just wanted to point to two historical cases with regard to using civilians as human shields by the Islamic Republic in Iran. Both going back to 1988, during the latter stages of the first Gulf War, when an Iranian civilian airliner, an Iran Airbus airliner, took off from Bandar Abbas Airport to Dubai. At the time, underneath near the Strait of Hormuz, there was a naval skirmish between the US naval units and IRGC units. The authorities, the airport authorities, the military authorities at Bandar Abbas Airport, which, by the way, is also a military airbase, were fully aware of the situation down there, just below the international civilian corridor that connected Bandar Abbas to Dubai. But nevertheless, they dispatched Airbus, and I believe they actually knew that something could happen to this airliner because of the previous instances that US naval ships warned civilian airplanes when they overflew them. So perhaps they hoped that something would happen, something tragic with devastating dimensions would happen that could affect the end of the Iran-Iraq War, that could facilitate the civilian, the political leadership in Iran to put an end to the Iran-Iraq War. At the same time, around the same time when Iran attacked a US naval vessel and the Americans decided to retaliate by attacking two Iranian oil platforms in the Persian Gulf, they had warned Iranians the day before through the Swiss embassy, but the Iranians decided not to warn those platform workers that were on those platforms, because probably hoping that some casualties on the next morning when the attack started would give them a propaganda boost.
Thank you, Dr. Nadimi. I'm going to allow one more question to Scott Lightfoot from CTV News. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'm hoping I can squeeze in just a quick follow-up and then my question. The follow-up to Andrew's question, is there any evidence or does the panel have a belief that Flight 752 specifically, not just a commercial airliner, but this specific flight was targeted?
We brought our reasons, Scott. We talked about the American citizenship screening in the airport, and the destruction of the evidence, the Toreman's capacity, all of that shows us that this flight was targeted, in our opinion. But as we said, it's very difficult to see a smoking gun here. This is not our job. And as Javad said about asymmetrical war, the head of IRGC in Parliament, that's the exact word that he says, that at that time, we were thinking about taking the hard revenge of Qasem Soleimani, and at the same time, we were thinking about de-escalating the tensions with United States. So they took their so-called revenge. And on the other side, Flight PS752 was shut down. And another thing I want to mention here, this is the ideology of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The former Supreme Leader of Iran believes if in the war there are Muslims and infidels that can be targeted, you are allowed to target both of them, and the Muslims, they go to heaven. And they are martyrs. They offered us that our loved ones are martyrs. And this is what they do. This is the ideology of the regime of Iran. And it's very hard to understand even for ordinary people, but Iranian people, they already know. They know this regime. And for us, as I explained at the beginning, it's very easy to understand how they can do this kind of crimes.
So I just wanted to ask that you mentioned that you had shared your report with government officials. I'm presuming you've also shared this report with the other families of the victims. Can I just ask, what has been the response from them on learning this information?
Honestly, we had a conversation yesterday with majority of the families, and they asked us to listen to this report today because it was on an embargo, and they didn't want to endanger the report to be published at 1:30 today, because we can see the agents of the Islamic Republic everywhere, not among the families. I mean, They control their phone sets, they control their internet. And it was very difficult for us to share that. We were ready to do that, but they said, okay, we are not safe here. They're not safe in Iran. Let's see what happened 2 days ago, 3 days ago in Iran. And they were surrounded, as I said, by agents in Iran and for the show trial. So we didn't have the opportunity, unfortunately, but I say hi to all of them right now. And so hopefully they will see it today, and we will have another session with them to answer the questions.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, our attendees, and thank you, our panel. We are now at the end of our press release today. Thank you to our audience, journalists and reporters from different media platforms, and to all of you who watched us live. A link to the full report in English can be found on the association's website, and also a recording of today's session in webinar format will be sent to all participating journalists and reporters whose contacts have been added to the association's database in the past. I thank you all, and I wish you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.